Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. What would you do if you came home from vacation and your entire lot had been bulldozed, flowers gone, trees removed, and then the HOA demanded you pay for it? I didn't argue. I built a case, and the first email they sent me was the mistake that sparked everything. I work as a project manager for a mid-sized engineering firm, which means I spend my days dealing with budgets, timelines, and people who think they know better than they actually do. My wife and I have been saving every penny for the past 5 years to build our dream home from scratch. Not some cookie-cutter McMansion, but something thoughtful and sustainable that we could actually call our own. Last year, we finally had enough saved to buy the perfect lot. It was a half-acre plot right at the edge of a newer suburban development. The previous owner had been a farmer who let this particular section sit fallow for years before selling it to the developers. When we bought it, it was just an empty field covered in whatever had grown wild over time. The lot had one catch, though. It fell just inside the boundaries of the local HOA. I wasn't thrilled about that, but the location was perfect and the price was right. My wife and I figured we could deal with some reasonable neighborhood rules if it meant getting our dream spot. Now here's where most people would have just thrown down some grass seed and called it a day. But I had a different idea. Instead of creating another boring lawn that would need constant watering and chemical treatments, I decided to turn our lot into something special. I spent months researching native plants and pollinator-friendly flowers that would thrive in our climate zone. Every weekend for nearly a year, my wife and I would drive out to our lot with bags of carefully selected seeds. I'm talking about specific varieties here, not just throwing wildflower mix around and hoping for the best. We planted milkweed specifically for monarch butterflies, purple coneflowers that would attract bees, and black-eyed Susans that bloom at different times throughout the season. I even special-ordered seed mixes from a company that specializes in regional ecosystems. The project wasn't cheap either. Those specialized seeds cost serious money, and we also invested in 2 young red oak saplings that would eventually provide shade for our future home. These weren't tiny twigs from the garden center. These were 5-year-old trees that I had transplanted carefully, with their root balls intact and everything. Each one cost us about $400, but they were going to be centerpiece features of our landscaping plan. By spring of this year, our lot looked incredible. Sure, it didn't look like the manicured lawns surrounding it, but it was alive in a way that those chemically treated grass carpets could never be. We had butterflies, bees, and birds visiting daily. The morning dew would catch on the different flower heads and create this amazing natural display that changed throughout the seasons. That's when I first ran into problems with the HOA president. Her name was something generic, but everyone just called her by her last name. She was exactly what you'd expect from someone who volunteers to run a neighborhood association. Perfect lawn, perfect shrubs trimmed into geometric shapes, and the kind of personality that finds joy in pointing out when other people's trash cans are visible from the street. She cornered me one afternoon when I was out checking on the oak saplings. She started off friendly enough, asking about our plans for building and when we expected to break ground. Then she made a comment about how excited everyone was to see what we would do with that messy field and how a nice tidy lawn would really complete the neighborhood. I explained our pollinator garden project to her, thinking she might appreciate the environmental benefits. I told her about the specialized plants we'd chosen and how the whole setup would require virtually no maintenance once established. She just gave me this tight, fake smile and said something about how important it was that everyone in the neighborhood maintained appropriate standards. Looking back, I should have recognized that as a warning sign. But at the time, I was focused on our building timeline and dealing with permits and contractors. The lot was looking beautiful, and we weren't violating any specific HOA rules that I could find in their guidelines. My wife and I had been planning a vacation for months. We both worked demanding jobs and hadn't taken any real time off in over a year. We decided on a week-long trip to visit her family across the country. It was going to be our last big vacation before we started the intensity of home construction. The week before we left, we had gotten some good rain and everything on our lot was thriving. The wildflowers were in full bloom and the butterflies were everywhere. I remember taking some photos before we left, thinking about how much progress we'd made in just 1 year. We flew out on a Saturday morning and spent an amazing week just relaxing and enjoying time with family. No work emails, no construction meetings, just pure vacation mode. We were both refreshed and excited to get back home and check on our lot after all that rain. The flight back was delayed, so we didn't get home until late Sunday evening. We were tired from traveling, so we decided to wait until Monday morning to drive out and see how everything had weathered the week of storms. Monday morning was one of those perfect spring days where the air is crisp and everything feels full of possibility. My wife had to get back to work, but I had taken an extra day off specifically so I could spend some time at the lot and maybe do some planning for the house foundation. I grabbed my coffee and drove out there around 9 in the morning. I was actually excited thinking about how lush everything would look after a week of good rain. I had my camera ready to document how much everything had grown while we were away. When I turned the corner and saw our lot, I literally had to pull over and stop the car. I sat there for a full minute just staring, trying to process what I was seeing. Our lot had been completely destroyed. Everything was gone. The entire half-acre had been mowed down to stubble. The soil was churned up in places where heavy equipment had obviously driven across it. All those carefully planted wildflowers, the specialized native plants that had taken months to establish, reduced to brown chopped-up stems poking out of torn-up earth. But the worst part was the oak trees. Those beautiful 5-year-old saplings that we had spent so much money on and planted so carefully were just gone. Not mowed down, but actually removed. I could see the holes where they had been, with disturbed soil around them like someone had used a machine to yank them right out of the ground. The air still smelled like diesel fuel and cut vegetation. There were tire tracks everywhere from heavy machinery. Someone had brought in serious equipment to do this job. This wasn't some guy with a push mower who got confused about property lines. This was a professional landscaping crew with industrial equipment who had systematically destroyed everything we had worked on for nearly a year. I got out of the car and walked around the lot in a daze. Every step felt like I was walking through a crime scene. Pieces of what used to be my oak trees were scattered around. Some of the specialized flower plants had been so established that you could still see their root systems exposed where they had been ripped up. I think I stood out there for close to an hour just trying to understand what had happened. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe a landscaping crew had gotten the wrong address or misunderstood their instructions. But as I looked around, I realized this wasn't random destruction. Someone had specifically targeted every single thing we had planted and removed it all. The lot was completely surrounded by other properties, so whoever did this had to have driven heavy equipment right through the neighborhood. This wasn't something that could have happened accidentally or without someone noticing. I drove home in shock and called my wife at work. She could barely understand me at first because I was talking so fast and probably not making much sense. When I finally got the story out, she was as stunned as I was. We kept asking each other who could have done this and why. That's when my phone started buzzing with text messages from neighbors. Apparently word was already spreading about what had happened to our lot. One neighbor said they had seen landscaping trucks there a few days earlier but assumed we had hired them. Another mentioned that they thought it was weird to see all that equipment for just mowing but figured it wasn't their business. The pieces started coming together. Someone had hired a professional landscaping company to destroy our pollinator garden while we were out of town. This wasn't vandalism or an accident. This was deliberate and coordinated. I spent that entire day calling around to different landscaping companies in the area, trying to figure out who had done the work. Most of them were helpful and checked their records, but nobody had any jobs scheduled for our address. Finally, one company confirmed that they had done work at our lot, but they said the work order had come through the HOA and they assumed it was authorized. That's when everything clicked into place. The HOA president and her perfect lawn, her comments about appropriate neighborhood standards, her fake smile when I explained our pollinator project. While my wife and I were relaxing on vacation, the HOA had hired contractors to destroy our project and send us the bill. I was furious, but I'm also methodical by nature. My first instinct was to drive straight to the HOA president's house and have it out with her right there on her perfect front lawn. But something in my project manager brain kicked in and told me to slow down and think strategically. If I went in angry and emotional, I would be playing their game by their rules. They probably expected me to blow up and make a scene that they could point to later as evidence of what kind of difficult neighbor I was. They wanted me to be the unreasonable one so they could justify what they had done. Instead, I decided to handle this the way I handle difficult clients at work. professionally, methodically, and with everything documented. The first thing I did was grab my camera and go back to the lot to document everything. I took dozens of photos from every angle, making sure to capture the tire tracks, the holes where the oak trees had been, and the scattered debris. I also took photos of the undamaged lots on either side of ours for comparison. Then I started making phone calls. I called the landscaping company that had done the work and got as much information as I could about who had authorized the job and exactly what they had been instructed to do. They were actually pretty helpful once they realized there might be a problem with the work order. The crew supervisor told me that someone from the HOA had called them and said there was an overgrown lot that needed immediate attention. They were told it was a health and safety issue because of complaints from neighbors about weeds and potential pest problems. The work order specifically mentioned brush clearing, weed abatement, and debris removal. He also mentioned that the person who hired them had been very specific about wanting everything removed completely, including any trees or large plants. They were told to leave the lot in a condition where it could be easily maintained going forward. This confirmed what I already suspected. The HOA hadn't just made a mistake or overstepped their authority. They had deliberately hired contractors to destroy our project, and they had been very specific about what they wanted done. But I still needed proof of who had authorized this and what legal authority they claimed to have. I spent the next few hours researching our HOA bylaws and regulations. I pulled out every document we had received when we bought the lot and started reading through the fine print. I was looking for any rule or regulation that could have been used to justify what they had done. The HOA guidelines mentioned general requirements for property maintenance and prohibited certain things like junk cars or excessive weeds. But there was nothing specific about native plant gardens or any requirement for traditional lawns. The language was pretty vague and seemed to focus more on preventing obvious neglect rather than mandating specific landscaping choices. More importantly, every rule in the HOA guidelines required written notice to property owners before any enforcement action could be taken. According to their own procedures, they were supposed to send us a formal violation notice and give us at least 30 days to address any problems before taking any action themselves. We had never received any such notice. In fact, we had never received any communication from the HOA about our lot at all, other than the general welcome materials when we first bought the property. By evening, I had a pretty clear picture of what had happened and what my options were. The HOA had acted without any legal authority and without following their own procedures. They had hired contractors to destroy thousands of dollars worth of improvements to our property while we were out of town and unable to defend ourselves. I was still angry, but now I was also confident that I had a strong case against them. The question was how to proceed. That's when the mail arrived the next day and made my decision much easier. Sitting in our mailbox was an official-looking envelope with the HOA return address. Inside was a formal invoice addressed to us for $850. The invoice was itemized with charges for brush clearing, weed abatement, debris hauling, and equipment fees. At the bottom was a note stating that payment was due within 30 days to avoid late fees and potential legal action. They had destroyed our project, and now they wanted us to pay them for the privilege. I showed the invoice to my wife when she got home from work, and we both just started laughing. It was so absurd that it was almost funny. These people had the nerve to send us a bill for vandalizing our property. But that invoice was also exactly what I needed. It was written proof that the HOA had taken this action and considered it legitimate. They weren't claiming it was a mistake or that they were sorry for any confusion. They were doubling down and demanding payment. That night I drafted my response, but I didn't send an angry email or make threatening phone calls. Instead, I composed a very professional business letter that I planned to send via certified mail to every member of the HOA board. The letter was polite, clear, and absolutely devastating. I started by acknowledging receipt of their invoice for $850 for landscaping services. Then I explained that before I could process any payment, I would need them to provide me with several pieces of documentation. First, I requested a copy of the signed work order authorizing these services that bore my signature as the property owner. Second, I asked for the specific bylaw, with section and paragraph number that my lot had been in violation of. Third, I wanted to see the official meeting minutes where the HOA board had voted to take this enforcement action against my property. Fourth, I requested a copy of the contract between the HOA and the landscaping company for this specific job, including any authorization for the removal of trees and established plants. Finally, I asked for copies of any violation notices that had been sent to me prior to this action, as required by their own enforcement procedures. The letter concluded by stating that I was happy to pay any legitimate charges once I could verify that proper procedures had been followed and appropriate authorization had been obtained. I kept the tone completely professional and reasonable. I didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing or threaten legal action. I simply asked for the documentation that should exist if everything had been done properly. But I knew they couldn't provide any of that documentation because none of it existed. They had acted unilaterally and without any legal authority. I printed the letter on professional letterhead and sent copies via certified mail with return receipt requested to every member of the HOA board at their home addresses. This way, every board member would receive the letter personally and I would have proof that they had received it. Then I waited. The response came faster than I expected, but not from who I expected it to come from. 3 days after sending my letter, I received an email response from the HOA president herself. She had CC'd herself but nobody else, which was interesting. The email was short and dismissive. She wrote that the HOA board was fully authorized to maintain community standards and that my lot had been an overgrown mess that generated multiple complaints from neighbors. She stated that the work had been necessary for health and safety reasons and that I needed to remit payment within 30 days to avoid late fees. The email completely ignored my requests for documentation and authorization. She didn't provide a single piece of the paperwork I had requested. But more importantly, she had put her position in writing. She had admitted that the HOA had taken this action and she had claimed it was justified. She had also made it clear that they had no intention of providing any documentation or following proper procedures. That email was exactly what I needed to move to the next phase of my plan. I spent the next week gathering ammunition for what was coming next. I wasn't going to just complain about what they had done, I was going to make them pay for it. First, I called a certified arborist to get a professional assessment of the damage to my oak trees. The arborist came out and examined the holes where the trees had been removed and looked at the scattered pieces that remained. His report was more valuable than I had expected. Those 5-year-old red oak saplings weren't just worth the $400 each that I had paid for them. According to his assessment, properly established oak trees of that age and size, including the cost of replacement and professional planting, were valued at $1,200 each. The report also noted that the trees had been removed improperly, which had caused additional damage to the surrounding soil and root systems of nearby plants. The arborist estimated that it would take specialized soil treatment and amendment to restore the planting areas to their previous condition. Next, I contacted a local landscape designer who specialized in ecological restoration and native plant communities. I explained what had been destroyed and asked for a detailed estimate to fully restore the pollinator meadow. The designer came out and spent over an hour examining the lot and taking notes. Her estimate was comprehensive and professional. Full restoration of a half-acre native pollinator meadow, including soil preparation, specialized seed mixes, plant installation, and establishment care, would cost $3,000. She also provided me with detailed documentation of what had been destroyed, including rare and expensive native plants that would need to be special ordered and some that would take multiple growing seasons to fully establish. I also documented my own time and expenses. I calculated all the hours I had spent dealing with this situation so far, including research time, phone calls, meetings, and site visits. At a reasonable project management hourly rate of $75 per hour, I had already invested over 10 hours of professional time in dealing with this mess. By the end of the week, I had a complete damage assessment that totaled significantly more than the $850 the HOA wanted me to pay them. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play that would turn this whole situation on its head. I drafted a formal counter invoice and prepared to send it the same way I had sent my first letter, via certified mail to every member of the HOA board. The letter calmly stated the facts. The HOA had hired contractors to perform unauthorized work on my private property without my knowledge or consent. They had caused significant damage to established landscaping and valuable trees. When requested to provide documentation and authorization for their actions, they had failed to do so. Since the HOA had failed to provide any legal justification for their actions and had acted outside of their authority, they were fully liable for the damages they had caused. Attached to the letter was my own formal invoice to the HOA for the full cost of restoration and damages. The itemized bill included destruction of 2 red oak saplings at $1,200 each, full restoration of the native pollinator meadow at $3,000, the arborist consultation fee at $250, and administrative and project management fees at $750. The total amount due was $6,400. The letter concluded by informing the HOA that their original $850 invoice was rejected as invalid and without authorization. It also stated that if my invoice for $6,400 was not paid within 30 days, I would be filing a lawsuit in small claims court for the full amount plus additional damages for trespassing and destruction of property. I kept copies of everything and sent the certified letters on a Friday afternoon. Then I waited to see how they would respond to getting a bill for nearly 8 times what they had tried to charge me. The weekend passed quietly, but I knew the letters would be delivered on Monday and the real fun would begin shortly after that. I had turned their fraudulent $850 bill into a legitimate $6,400 claim against them. Now we would see how confident they were in their legal authority when they were the ones being asked to pay. The first week after sending those certified letters was completely quiet. No phone calls, no emails, no angry neighbors showing up at my door. I started to wonder if maybe they were just going to ignore my invoice the same way they had ignored my request for documentation. But then I remembered that I had sent the letters to every board member individually at their home addresses. The HOA president might be able to control what information reached the other board members through official channels, but she couldn't stop them from receiving certified mail at their own homes. I figured the other board members were probably learning about this situation for the first time and trying to figure out what had actually happened. Most HOA board members are just regular neighbors who volunteer for a thankless job because somebody has to do it. They probably had no idea what the president had authorized while they were all going about their normal lives. My wife asked me several times during that first week if I thought they would actually pay my invoice or if they would just tell me to sue them. I told her that it would all depend on whether the other board members realized how much legal trouble they were potentially in. By the second week, I was starting to get antsy. I had put a lot of work into researching my position and preparing my response, and the waiting was killing me. I started checking the mail obsessively and jumping every time the phone rang. Then, exactly 2 weeks after I had sent my letters, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. The person on the other end identified himself as legal counsel for the HOA. He was very polite and professional, and he asked if I might have some time to discuss the recent correspondence regarding work performed at my property. I told him I would be happy to discuss it, but that I preferred to keep everything in writing so there wouldn't be any misunderstandings later. He said that was completely reasonable and asked if he could send me a formal letter outlining the HOA's position. That phone call told me everything I needed to know. The HOA had hired a lawyer, which meant they were taking my invoice seriously. It also meant they had probably figured out that they didn't have a legal leg to stand on and were looking for a way to settle this without going to court. The lawyer's letter arrived 3 days later, and it was completely different in tone from anything I had received from the HOA directly. The letter began by stating that the HOA board had conducted a thorough review of the recent landscaping activities at my property. The review had revealed that proper procedures had not been followed and that the board regretted any misunderstanding that had occurred. The letter went on to confirm that my original invoice for $850 had been voided and canceled. The HOA would not be pursuing any payment from me for the landscaping work that had been performed. Regarding my counter-invoice for damages, the letter stated that while the HOA did not necessarily agree with all of my damage calculations, they were interested in reaching a mutually acceptable resolution that would avoid the time and expense of litigation. The HOA was prepared to offer a settlement payment of $5,000 as full and final compensation for any damages or inconvenience I may have suffered. In exchange, I would agree to release the HOA from any further claims related to this incident. I read that letter 3 times before it really sank in. They were offering me $5,000 to make this go away. That was more than 5 times what they had originally tried to bill me, and it was close enough to my damage estimate that I could actually afford to restore my pollinator meadow properly. My wife and I talked it over that evening. We could certainly reject their offer and take them to court for the full $6,400, but litigation is expensive and time-consuming, and there was no guarantee we would win or be able to collect even if we did win. $5,000 was a substantial settlement that would cover most of our actual damages and send a clear message that the HOA couldn't just destroy people's property whenever they felt like it. I called the lawyer the next day and told him that while I felt their offer was somewhat low given the full extent of the damages, I was willing to accept $5,000 as a final settlement in the interest of resolving this matter quickly. He seemed relieved and said he would have settlement papers prepared within a few days. He also mentioned that the HOA board would be implementing new procedures to prevent this kind of situation from happening in the future. The settlement check arrived the following week along with a release agreement that formally resolved all claims related to the incident. I signed the papers and deposited the check, officially ending my battle with the HOA. But the story didn't end there. Word of what had happened spread through the neighborhood pretty quickly. People talk, and when an HOA ends up paying a homeowner $5,000 to settle a dispute, that's the kind of news that gets around. I started hearing from neighbors that there had been some serious tension at the recent board meetings. Apparently, the other board members had not been happy when they found out what the president had done without consulting them. They were even less happy when they found out how much it was going to cost to fix her mistake. Several neighbors approached me to apologize for not speaking up when they had seen the landscaping trucks at my lot. They said they had assumed I had hired the work myself and didn't want to be nosy by asking questions. A few people also mentioned that they were curious about my pollinator garden project and asked if I would be willing to share information about native plants and ecological landscaping. It turned out that several neighbors were interested in reducing their lawn care costs and environmental impact, but didn't know where to start. The HOA president, meanwhile, seemed to have developed a sudden interest in avoiding me completely. She no longer walked by our house during her evening strolls, and she definitely wasn't making any more comments about neighborhood landscaping standards. The annual HOA meeting was held about 2 months after our settlement was finalized. I made sure to attend, along with my wife and several neighbors who had expressed support for our situation. The HOA president did not run for re-election. In fact, she announced at the beginning of the meeting that she would be stepping down immediately due to other commitments. She didn't mention our dispute specifically, but everyone in the room knew exactly why she was leaving. The board also announced several new policies that had been implemented since the spring landscaping incident. The most important change was that no HOA-affiliated contractor could perform any work on private property without written signed authorization from the property owner. Any board member who authorized work without proper documentation would be personally liable for any resulting damages. They also clarified the process for addressing potential violations, requiring formal written notice and a reasonable opportunity for homeowners to respond before any enforcement action could be taken. I used the settlement money to begin restoring my pollinator meadow, but this time I made some improvements to the original design. I hired the landscape designer who had helped me calculate the damage estimate, and we developed a plan that would be even more spectacular than what had been destroyed. We also installed a small split-rail fence around the perimeter of the lot. The fence wasn't necessary for the plants, but it sent a clear message about property boundaries and would make it obvious to anyone that this was intentional landscaping rather than random weeds. On the fence, I mounted a professionally made sign that read, "Native Pollinator Habitat Restoration in Progress, Ecologically Sensitive Area, Please Do Not Disturb." The sign included my contact information and an invitation for neighbors to ask questions about the project. I figured education was the best way to prevent future misunderstandings about what we were trying to accomplish. By the end of the summer, our restored meadow was even more beautiful than the original had been. The professional design included better spacing and more diverse plant selections. We had added a small seating area where visitors could observe the wildlife without disturbing the habitat. The whole project became something of a neighborhood attraction. Families would walk by in the evenings to watch the butterflies and bees, and several neighbors asked for advice about incorporating native plants into their own landscaping. The new HOA board reached out to me in the fall to ask if I would be willing to present information about ecological landscaping at the next annual meeting. They thought other residents might be interested in learning about low-maintenance alternatives to traditional lawns. I agreed to do the presentation, partly because I wanted to share what I had learned about native plants, but mostly because I thought it was important to maintain a positive relationship with the new leadership. They had handled the aftermath of our dispute professionally and seemed genuinely interested in preventing similar problems in the future. My wife and I are finally ready to break ground on our house construction this spring. The architect incorporated the mature pollinator meadow into the building design, and our new home will overlook the habitat area we've created. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm actually grateful for how it turned out. Yes, it was stressful and expensive to deal with the HOA dispute, but we ended up with a better project than we had originally planned and $5,000 to help pay for it. More importantly, the incident led to real changes in how the HOA operates and better communication between the board and the homeowners. Several neighbors have started their own native plant projects, and our little corner of the neighborhood is becoming known for its commitment to environmental sustainability. The former HOA president moved away about 6 months after the annual meeting. I never found out if the move was related to our dispute or just coincidental, but I noticed that her perfect lawn started looking pretty rough in the weeks before she put the house on the market. Our new pollinator meadow is now in its second growing season and is absolutely thriving. We have documented over 30 species of butterflies and moths, dozens of bee species, and more bird varieties than I can keep track of. The oak trees we replanted are growing strong and will eventually provide the shade canopy we originally envisioned. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to be aggressively reasonable in response. The HOA president was expecting me to get angry and defensive, which would have given her the justification she needed to escalate the conflict. Instead, I stayed professional and methodical, which forced her to defend actions that couldn't be defended. In the end, the HOA didn't just drop their ridiculous $850 bill. They paid me nearly 6 times that amount to compensate for their mistake. I guess you could say my little meadow has the most expensive lawn care in the whole neighborhood, and I didn't have to pay a dime for it. The irony is that if the HOA president had just taken the time to understand what we were doing, instead of assuming it was a problem that needed fixing, none of this would have happened. Our pollinator garden was actually increasing property values and creating a unique amenity that set our neighborhood apart from the cookie-cutter development surrounding us. But I suppose some people are just more comfortable with conflict than collaboration. Fortunately, the rest of us learned from her mistake and our neighborhood is better for it. The next one is a malicious compliance story. My first real job after graduating was in a very toxic company where I stayed for 1 year, but I really think that if I had to work again in such a company, I would resign after 1 week. There was no official dress code, but men would dress rather formally, suit and tie or something business casual but still conservative, no jeans, no sports shoes. Then a new guy was hired in our team, a very skilled IT developer, very professional, and a nice colleague to work with. But for some reason, someone up in the hierarchy had an issue with him not wearing a tie like the 3 or 4 other guys in the same team. Our manager actually asked him to wear a tie. Now by then, he had been in the company for a couple of months but had confessed to me he was fed up with the toxic environment and was close to landing his dream job in another company, so he complied. And came to the office with an ugly, flashy yellow tie with a big comic character printed on it. He came into the office with a big smug smile and made a point to go and say hello to every employee in every closed office in the building so everyone could see how elegant he was today. He never wore a tie again. He finally landed his dream job and resigned. But then someone reminded him he had been on a training paid by the company and that as he resigned less than a year after that, he was contractually committed to pay it back. That was unexpected and he was still figuring out if he should pay or if he should challenge that. But then one of the managers, not ours but very influential, came to him with a proposal for a deal. They had a confidential project that he wanted him to work on outside of the office. They were very afraid of unions hearing about it, and they needed him to adapt a piece of software for that, and if he accepted to do it without telling anyone, not even our manager, they would waive the expensive training fee. The manager thought it would take 4 of 5 days for rewriting the code, which all in all would equate the cost for the training. That was of course very confidential, but he was telling me the whole story when the deal was done and he was in the last 2 or 3 days of his notice period. Then I thought about it. Hey, but I know that app. There is not much to change. With his smug smile, like with the tie. Yep, thinking a bit more. There is even nothing to change in the code. Not a single line. Just one flag to change in a table for some records and that's it. That is literally a 10-minute job. Nodding, still with the smug smile, just bigger. Yep, well done you bastard. You screwed them. The next one is an entitled people story. This guy stalked and harassed me for months. I finally sent him and his mom a cease and desist, hoping if she saw it too, she'd make him get some counseling so this guy could just become a better person without having to throw him in prison first, which is expensive for everybody involved, including the taxpayers. I know better now, mocking him up and throw away the key. I very gently articulated to this woman that her son has been having severe relationship delusions about me, where I told him no thank you months ago, and he still thinks he's dating me and lashes out at me when that false belief is contradicted. I sent evidence and everything, screenshots of messages that this guy sent me. He keeps sexually harassing me. So I give it a few months and I wait. Finally, I say it again, cease and desist, please. I send proof he's posting inappropriate pictures and rants, explaining she really needs to get her kid some psychiatric help. He posts threatening to abduct me and makes unwanted sexual comments about how much he thinks I'm attracted to him. I'm married and this other guy harassing me is 5'5" at most, has gross scuzzy facial hair and dresses like he was clothed by a blind dog at Walmart, not my type. He refuses to stop harassing me. I also ended up having to report him to the cops because I found out he's been false reporting me while I'm sitting on screenshots of suicide threats he made because he said life without a sexual partner wasn't worth it for him. He also told me it would be my fault if this stalker killed Kay because I'm threatening his life by making him depressed for not being interested in him. That was verbal, so I can't prove it directly, but I do have screenshots and copies in writing of similar threats. I have reported it every time there is an incident, including to the cops, the FBI, hate crime agencies, and the DOJ. I explained very clearly I don't think this guy is serious at all about the suicide threats. I think he's using suicide threats as a way to threaten me, which disturbed me. I called in threats against me, not threats to this a-hole himself. He tried to claim I swatted him and pretended he was actively committing suicide. I was actually in the phone explaining this guy was threatening to kill me again because not dating him was making him depressed. They lied and tried to convince a bunch of people I was acting all worried about them and not just the truth, which is me going, whoa, I hope this crazy mother ducker doesn't try to kill me. I waited a few months and he still didn't stop. He'd go look through my phone and my socials, literally breached my account security in HBO and a few other sites, and he'd posts about it and try to tell me he didn't think I could like it anymore, which, no, big fat number. Anyway, that was the third cease and desist, and I explained I'm not a liar and this woman probably should hand-wave this off. There have been cases where men like her son hurt people and the parent gets in trouble too for ignoring all the 827 signs that the kid was about to have some kind of fit of violence and hurt people. Finally, the guy was posting pretending we dated, and I was so mad and disgusted. This guy has put my husband and family and I through so much insanity because he wouldn't just be polite to us and back off of us and me. I went and I asked a support group. I was like, I didn't date this guy. He's made repeats before. Am I in danger of him raping me since he's manufacturing this whole relationship with me in his head? I also tried to tell the guy to cease and desist, and he laughed in my face and claimed my family and or loved ones are totally indifferent to me. So I blocked him and I waited for answers on my question. I got back an overwhelming response of, girl, you are in danger. So I was like, that's not good. A couple people were asking me questions casually about had I done this or that for safety, and I was like, well, I have done this, I haven't done that. Then I get a message saying, just lay back and let it happen, you're stalker. So I'm like, you're disgusting, and I block and report. Then I get this dick pic from an account that has been talking normally. I'm like, you, TF you, and I block and report. Finally, I go back to this woman. It's been like 3 months, and I go, "Ma'am, your son sent me this. My whole family and I are scared he's going to attack us and or assaulted me. Could you please take this seriously and both of you stop without the police at your door?" It's an intensive process. And I explained to her that sexual coercion/attempted sexual coercion crimes are taken seriously by the law. It's a fine of up to $30,000 just to enable that kind of thing to happen. Would she please protect herself, her kid, and me by making him get some psychiatric care? She finally responded when there were no more excuses, and she was like, "We'll make you so you can never bother us again, and you're crazy, you're threatening us." "No, ma'am, please stop," is not a threat. "You should be locked up in a psych ward instead." How I don't know, it's obviously not my penis in the picture. Just verbally abused me for having proof that despite all this guy's false assertions of being desired that started way back when I said no thanks. The first time, this has always been a one-sided this guy pursuing me against my wishes. I say I'm not interested in the stalker. He accused me of saying no because I have a crush on him, which I stated very thoroughly. I don't. I love my husband. Here's concrete proof that he's the person that's been sexually harassing me and all his copious body hair having nastiness. And there's no more lies for it. This is exactly what I've been saying he's been doing. His lie is done for. Not only am I not interested in posting and scared this guy is going to try to force me, he's being such a horn dog, he's soliciting me and pretending to be other people to try and get close and talk to me. Keep in mind, this guy told me if I were going to reject him, then he wishes me dead. That he assumes I'll never amount to anything in life, which he would go out of his way to make sure happened. He really did try to do that too. I had to move. I've been spending every business day in the phone with the police. My education has been totally interrupted because this falsely entitled little brat doesn't want me studying if I won't fix his virginity. I've spent thousands on security measures. PIS, relocating, cameras, dogs, Ubers because I don't drive anywhere alone, new phone and computer twice because he got my number somehow. This guy is literally actively trying to ruin my life because I don't want to have sex with him and he has delusions of entitlement to my coochie. The whole time he's been swearing, it's me with the crush, and that's why I've been avoiding him so hard. He followed my account from several dozen other accounts because he got blocked, and finally his lie has unraveled. I told his mom very calmly she can't have somebody locked up and or committed for telling someone her son's been sexually harassing me, that it's not illegal and or a mental illness to not want to see her son's genitals, and that she doesn't need to talk to me that way. I took out a restraining order. She showed up and lied and said she never threatened me. That's a lie. I brought the screenshot. And I told the court she's lying. Here's the threat. Anyway, the guy who is restrained from contacting me is chasing me around the internet like Coyote and Roadrunner, shrieking at me, trying to make me apologize for slandering his mother by telling the truth. You can just tell this woman had never told this kid no a day in his life, never asked him to play nice, never suggested he might be anything but God's gift to women because they both react with homicidal rage when this guy is simply asked to be appropriate like everybody else. She committed perjury to try to put me in danger and keep me from getting the restraining order so my family would be safe. No, I'm not apologizing to that horrible woman for telling the truth. That is what happened. And for the first time, apparently, in these two spoiled, hateful lives, they've been held accountable for bullying people and lying about it, so they aren't told to stop being such overbearing, falsely entitled a-holes to people. Not in a million years am I saying sorry because she doesn't like that her whittle baby got told to stop threatening to assaulted me. No. Ew. Last I knew, this guy was claiming I falsely accused him of assaulted because I told him to please stop sexually harassing me and making assaulted threats. He's gotten in trouble, so he's trying to cook up some lies about something else he wants to pretend I supposedly did in order to try to make himself look like the victim because he battered and threatened a woman for telling him no, she's not interested in him. The guy is just a sicko too. Radicalized woman hating. Andrew Tate thinks a bunch of crazy evil stuff is a religion, hurting animals, people, etc. Likes to wave weapons around online. He is just not a person on any level who has the good grace to be appropriate. Before anybody comes for me here, I'm not trying to thump my holy book at anybody. I'm eclectic, but I know nobody has to do sick stuff to people to be a spiritual person. There's a difference between genuine spirituality and spirituality as a pretext to hurt people. I think he's no different from the churchgoers who once burned people because their holy book said they technically could. I am tired of this guy raging about how he thinks this is the feminist agenda because behavior that's always been illegal is still illegal. He's the person trying to politicize assaulted/sexual harassment/assaulted threats, etc., not me. I'm just saying I'm not alright with him battering me and harassing us for sexual attention. Update. He told me false accusations hurt, don't they? He falsely accused me of threatening him for asking him and his other creepy buddy who likes to torture animals to stop. Anyway, thank you for watching.